afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Synesec's Project Rescue Workshop. I'll start you off by saying that 90% of IT projects are delivered late. And Agile, hated by most senior management, has been proven to boost productivity massively, often doubling it. So why are so many companies struggling with Agile or avoiding it altogether and sticking to these outdated project management frameworks? Here's some more food for thought. 77% of high-performing companies understand the value of project management, whereas only 40% of low-performing ones understand its value. I think that's quite telling. We're going to talk to our delivery experts on how to handle challenges and get on track with your projects. I'm Ino. My name is not Andrew Mellish. I'm using a colleague's account here, so nice to meet you. I'm your host today. There will be a Q&A section, so you can start thinking about questions and send them through already. And the workshop is being recorded. So here we have our delivery experts. Let's start with Lisa Fenter, Head of Delivery, who has experience in the financial and media sectors. Now, before joining Synesec, she led a team to deliver broadcasting projects to Sky, ITV, and BBC. Our next expert is Andy Rainham, with over 20 years experience with enterprise IT development projects at IBM. And finally, we have George Tosolopoulos, CEO of Synesec, with over 20 years of experience managing software delivery teams to create business value. So let's get started. Now, Lisa, can you describe to me, using your experience, what are the signs that you're in trouble with your projects?
So I know signs not very difficult to see. Normally, it's when you're not seeing value at each sprint. Each sprint should provide value and incremental value towards the final product. When milestones are not regularly met, and if features are being delivered to UAT and your users out there keep logging change requests, so that's normally a sign that there's a problem. And then also, if you look at some of the reporting of the technical team, it would be, again, value of each sprint, not just to the technical team, but out to the business, as well as velocity of the team needs to be monitored of each sprint. And each sprint, you set some sprint goals aside, so you would then check whether you met those sprint goals, so that's quite evident. And then also a good indicator is a burn down. If your burn down is not correctly recording, there's a problem within the team or the planning or something like that.
Thank you. Now, how would you react immediately if you've just recognized some of these warning signs?
So, you know, the first thing is make sure you ask questions. Don't just let stuff slide. The first time you think there's a problem, there probably is, so you should question. Whether you're in the IT division or not, you should ask whoever the delivery person is questions about the delivery. And then once you've established there's a problem, you need to actually take a checkpoint in the project so that you can see where you are and what you've delivered, and see what's usable in the product that you can take forward. We do offer a service to help anybody with this, should you not know what to do. So we're happy to discuss that with any members today. It's essential that the team focuses on repositioning the end goal and then only delivering what is critical to the business at that point and what is essential for success. The sprint goals should be documented as well as what the project is trying to achieve. And then understand the dependencies and, of course, the underlying architecture, making sure that that's correct, that you haven't veered off track. And revise your backlog as well as your story descriptors and tickets. And then meet with the sponsor as well as executives to make sure you've realigned and kick it off again. This process sounds long, but it could take as short as 2 days, or in a much more complex project, you would put time aside and do that. So it's very important to look at the structure of the teams, whether that's working, and don't often change team members.
Thank you. So Lisa touched on delivery science there. Andy, could you give an overview of what this delivery science is and what it's based on, please? Oh, Andy, you're mute.
Rookie error, my bad. Okay, so yeah, so basically, at its most fundamental level, successful product delivery is a team sport, right? So it's, and like any team sport, all the teams that are participating in it need to be following the same rules, otherwise you end up with chaos. And so, you know, there is a inherent science behind being successful at putting products on the market, with some steps and some methodologies that you follow to really get the value out of these projects that you're running. Now, you know, to help any of our clients really see how successful their projects are being, we put together something called the Project Rescue Service, which essentially gathers together all of the best practices from across the project delivery space, and then does an evaluation of their setup to see how they're measuring and scoring against those best practices. Now, the way we go about doing this is we'll sit down with the company and look at their artifacts. So this is looking at things like the product vision board, the project roadmap, their design system that's associated with the product that they're developing, and kind of have a look and analyze how well set up that is. We'll also look at the data that's available within their project space. So things like velocity points, number of stories, number of features, number of bugs, etc., to see how productive the space is being. And then we've designed a survey that can be run through any number of members of the team in the organization to get an understanding of where they are with the project, how well they understand it, how well they understand the best practices. And ultimately what this will do is this will give us a combination of information that will allow us to have a comprehensive picture of how the project's running. And then we'll provide a report back that shows how well the project is run against those best practices, and also provide some insights about potential areas of change inside the project that can be done to knock things back on track again. Now, another thing that we'll do to help make sure that any of our clients are delivering well is have a look at their KPI dashboard. Now, what I mean by this is the data that's available to measure what output's like. So this isn't in Agile just velocity. It could again be things like the number of bugs that are raised, the number of changes that come in for the project. So again, we'll look at what KPIs they're doing, because this is going to be super important moving forwards to really understand and measure the impact of any changes that are made to the project. Now, the upside of this service that we're talking about is it runs in parallel to any of the operations that are happening inside the company's organization. So it's minimum of disruption, but it will help them really understand changes that they need to make, and also think about the actions that they need to take to get those changes to be effective. Now, finally, the key thing to bring across here is that we want to act as a catalyst for change. So we're actually in the boat with the company, getting the changes implemented, helping them improve what they do, and where everybody's invested in helping their delivery of the product to move forwards and improve. So we're very passionate about this, and certainly because we've got subject matter experts involved in this, the companies that we work with to knock their delivery back on target get insights from the first conversation that we have. So certainly a very interesting offering, and something that hopefully might be of interest to some of our participants.
Thank you, Andy. Now, George, I've got a tough question for you. How do you achieve change? And can you make sure to unmute yourself before you start answering?
I'm already unmuted, don't worry.
Oh, fabulous.
Yeah, it is a tough question, a good one. But so I think the first thing to appreciate is that people are the cornerstones of change. They're the fundamental building block. And the challenge there is actually there's a difference between theory and practical implementation of that theory. So, you know, whereas you can understand, you can do all the Prince 2 and all the Scrum training, but when it actually comes to how that works in your company for your product, it's different, and there needs to be a flavor of how do you do that? How does it work for us? There are always tweaks to make it practical, because you know the theory is all very good and well, but how does it practically apply? So I think once the team understand how to apply it practically, and they have that practical experience, then accountability follows shortly after that. So with accountability, everyone knows what they need to do, and then the team inherently want to do it. So it's kind of then understanding of where that accountability lies, who does what, where the problem areas are, and how to fix it. And I think it's challenging. So there's an element of if you're going through this kind of, and all companies do, but if you're going through change, it takes time. You know, that's the thing. You've got to have the patience to see those changes through. The way, if you're not patient like me, which I'm not at all, then you need assistance. You just kind of need the expertise, and they don't need to necessarily drag you through the change, but an assistance, the right word, left or right at the right point, speeds up the pace of change dramatically, which is great. And that's the question.
Thank you. George, what would you say to those people who think that they're in too deep already, or they've gone too far to change anything?
Well, look, my view on that is in terms of from a delivery perspective, like when is done, done. The definition of done, that's another matter. Let's leave that. But when is it done? It's not done till it's done. So if going back to what Lisa was saying in terms of delivering the wrong stuff or stuff that's not valuable, well, you're going to have to, if kind of there's an ostrich in the, with a head in the sand kind of environment, then you're going to keep going until those valuable things are delivered. And at some point there's going to be the crisis is going to hit, and either heads are going to roll or whatever the escalation is going to be in order for there to be change. So the point of the matter is, it's not going to go away. If this is a problem, if this is something that is worth doing for the business, which it will be to attract investment and effort, then the sooner change starts to happen, and the sooner that mistakes can be limited, the closer you're getting to effectively the delivery. So I actually would say it can't ever be too late, because it has to get delivered.
Thank you. Lisa, with your experience with a wide variety of companies, can you talk us through a real life example that was a horror story at the point in time when you joined it and then ended up being a happy ending because you were able to turn it around?
Sure, Anna. So following on what George said, I was once called in to a client who was 3 years down the line with a very well-known vendor delivering software, and it hadn't gone live as yet. And there were time pressures because their hardware was becoming end of life. They had to move on to cloud. And of course, most of the functionality that was missing from the legacy system was being done manually. So the longer it took to deliver the system, the more manual the processes became. So I was called in to assist them to see if I could help them with their delivery and get it done. And as George said, it's never too late. You would probably walk into that customer and think, oh my word, I don't even know where to go from here. But again, I stress there's a few important points to look at. One is take stock. Don't panic. There's going to be stuff you can reuse there. You just have to establish what it is. On top of that, make sure you understand what the end user needs and what the company is expecting to be delivered. And in this case, we took stock. We went through what was usable, what really wasn't developed to the company's processes, and we kind of realigned to deliver what was critical for success. And then got input from everybody, put a plan together to only deliver what's necessary to go live, so the minimum viable product. And we prioritized within the backlog and got back on the road and delivered the full project in 8 months. So they got what they needed before end of life hardware or before the hardware failed. And we were well within the scope. The company was expecting the project in about a year and a half. We managed to do it in 8 months by getting it back on track.
Thank you for that example. George, what advice would you give to people who are not managing the delivery team themselves?
Yeah, so know the warning signs. If kind of there's, if valuable things that you deem are valuable, that the business teams deem is valuable, are not getting delivered for whatever the reason is, it's not a good reason. I don't care what, I don't believe any of it. It's all excuses. So something that's valuable needs to be getting delivered at all times. Leave the fluffy stuff to the end. If anyone's making a reason or an excuse why that's not happening, it's just an excuse. You've got to keep digging because it's sort of indicative of problems. That aside, which like my number one rule, I would say you've got to, it's a bit of involvement required. It's kind of, you need to make sure that there's a representation of the business and the business interests, and it's not just a bunch of technologists that are working together to deliver what they think, their interpretation. That is going to be most of the thing, but there needs to be involvement of the business. There needs to be that guidance from that business. And then be reasonable, I think, as well. I mean, if you're the kind of, I don't know, I can certainly speak for myself. I'm the kind of person that's a very sort of black or white, it's binary. That's how I think. There's you've got to, people are going to be, the team is always trying to do their best. You got to believe that, and you got to trust that as an underlying principle. And then it's a case of understanding, you know, what are they trying to deliver? What are the obstacles they are facing? And assisting them from a business perspective wherever possible. But yeah, really a bit more involvement and know the warning signs so that you know what's acceptable and what isn't.
Thank you. Andy, you're the expert on the Synesec delivery science. Can you describe the long-term benefits of applying the science?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to pick up on something that George was saying a moment ago as well, because the difference between the old style of project management and project delivery, where you started out with a long list of requirements, had a long conversation about it, and then 12 months later, something pops out at the other end. The way that Agile works is it's incredibly reactive. It looks at what's changing in the landscape of the business being supported. It looks at what the users who are using the product are saying that they want. And so it's a constant ongoing conversation. And so applying the science behind best practice product delivery starts to bring the business and the technology teams closer together and creating synergy between them, because that's super important to make sure that you're actually building the right product in the right way and in the right space. Now, in terms of what our product rescue service can do, essentially it's a really like hackneyed phrase, but I mean, if you give a person a fish, they'll eat for a day. If you teach a person to fish, they'll feed themselves for life. And that's really the kind of principle that our delivery is predicated on. So we'll come in and there'll be instant benefits because we'll help you understand potentially where the key problem areas are and the ones to focus on that will get you your quickest benefits of improvement. We've got medium-term benefits in that ultimately you'll have access to subject matter experts who'll help coach you through this and take you on the journey. But ultimately, the long-term benefit here is kind of setting yourself up to be able to do these type of diagnoses yourself, and also see where you're making a change to something in your operations, actually track what impact that's having on your delivery. And so what I mentioned right at the beginning, this idea of a KPI dashboard that looks across all these different switches and levers around product delivery. So again, velocity, story points, features, value to the client, changes. That's really your meat and potatoes here. If you've got a good quality dashboard, and you're seeing the numbers, maybe too many changes happening in a certain space, which means you can't deliver the number of features that you want to your users, making a tweak in your change management process will allow you to kind of be reactive with that. So it's teaching you to set this KPI up and then also how to kind of measure them yourself. The other thing that we'll do is to George's point about kind of wanting to, and also your point at the beginning about Agile being a scary thing. I think one of the biggest challenges there is the ability to predict the future, right? Agile works in small 2-week time boxes. And so if you're a leader, it's very difficult to see how those 2-week time boxes then scale up into something that comes in 6 months' time. So setting the project up in the right way, in a way that allows you to really understand in each of those 2-week boxes what time, how much the team can deliver, and then scaling that up realistically and reliably over 6 months starts to give you the ability to look into the future and actually be able to set deadlines that are more realistic to deliver. So these are the kind of things that you'll benefit from with applying the science.
Thank you. So we're now arriving at the Q&A section. So send in your questions now, if you haven't already. We're going to start with some questions that we had come in beforehand when we were engaging with the people who've signed up. So let's start with this one here. Do improvements in estimating help in the prevention of slippage? I believe this person means the warning signs that Lisa mentioned. George, are you able to take this one on, please?
Absolutely. So yes, the short answer. There's no doubt, none whatsoever, that estimating of work packages, stories, however you're dividing up your work, it absolutely leads to less slippage. I guess to some extent, if I was going to take sort of look at the lighter side of it, it's like, you know, your mother telling you to eat vegetables when you're a kid. Like, you probably don't know why, but you know, you eat them and you feel better for them. So you kind of just do more of it, and actually there's good results. You might not understand why you're doing it. You're just kind of doing it because it's supposed to be right. Well, it's right. It is no other way. I mean, look, McKinsey's research that we have looked at is academic research. Our experience has shown it across dozens and dozens of projects, that absolutely estimating it does a couple of things. Number one is it makes sure that everyone understands what is required, otherwise they wouldn't be able to estimate it. So a great kind of another warning sign, if we're going back to that, is I don't know, we can't estimate because we don't know this and this. Well, then it's either too big a package, or you've got to break it down further, or you just don't know enough. And if you don't know enough, then what are you going to deliver if you don't know how to do it? I mean, that's just like, it's just for me, that's not an excuse. It's just doesn't apply. So I think that's the first thing. And secondly, again, goes to the fundamental that people want to deliver, teams want to deliver. if they understand what they need to do, and then they have committed to a time frame that they need to do it, they consciously and subconsciously work towards that, which means that they hold themselves accountable more because there's that line in the sand, is their definition. So I think that's absolutely, absolutely key. I mean, for us, I mean, we're a software business, and one of our KPIs internally is absolutely making sure that we're checking that everything we do has been estimated. Like, we don't do anything that doesn't get estimated. So, yeah, I mean, I can't emphasize this enough. Has to be done, non-negotiable.
Thank you. Moving on to the next question. How should I aim to manage a project's stakeholders' expectations in a situation where I'm in charge of a large infrastructural project? We're having some issues with dependencies and legacy services. Who would like to have this one? I think this probably sounds like a Lisa question to me.
Sure. So, I mean, firstly, you need to understand your dependencies and legacy system complications. And then the best way to manage your stakeholders is really to keep the transparency and report honestly. If you need to reset some of the goals, you need to do that as early as possible. Again, please try and keep to a minimum viable product for delivery. So even the stakeholders might want bells and whistles, do what's only necessary for your infrastructure project. And I would just say keep the communication channels open and regular. The best way is to build a relationship with your stakeholders in a way that they trust you, you have integrity, and you do what you say. So if you're not going to do something, you've got to stand up and say, I'm actually not going to make this timeline because of 1, 2, 3, but this is how we're going to rectify it. Make sure you always communicate the solution as well, and hopefully a more realistic timeline.
So Lisa, all very absolutely valid things to do. And I'd like to add to that as well, this idea of making sure that the stakeholders are core to what it is that you're doing. Certainly in projects that have succeeded that I've worked on before, the stakeholders come in early, and you have these kind of design thinking sessions where everybody puts their perspective together. You then collectively look at it on a board, start breaking it down as a team. And then actually what happens is the stakeholders don't feel that kind of chasm between IT delivering and them asking for requirements. You start to bridge this gap and bring it closer together. So you have that collective expectation. So, you know, it's I guess, and I understand from traditional ways IT's been developed that there's sort of been an us and them mentality, but the more you can get away from that, the more you can bring your stakeholders even into the agile practices. So you have a showcase at the end of every sprint that demonstrates what the team has delivered. If the stakeholders are engaged in that and they're seeing the improvements as it goes, then you're definitely getting them on board, and it may help with these things.
Yeah.
Thank you. Let's go back a step. We had a comment come through about estimations. Based on George's answer regarding estimations, is he saying that the whole team is involved in the estimating, or is it just the lead developer and PO, PM? George, can you specify? I see some head shaking.
Whole team has to be.
Whole team. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you can't, you know, you can't sign up someone for you can't go rent a house and someone else is agreeing the rent that you're going to pay. Is, you know, you need buy-in, you need accountability, you need understanding. And the other good thing about the whole team being involved with it, and it doesn't have to be onerous, right? When we're saying estimating, you're not estimating to a minute and to the hour. I mean, potentially on really small things, you can have a pretty good idea, but it's an indication, it's a yardstick, it's a scale. But what you have, generally speaking, in those estimations, if it's done, and when I say properly, there's various ways of doing it, so I'm not going to say properly, it's not that binary. But you have, if the whole team is involved, they will listen. Perhaps some of the more junior members of the team will listen to some of the more senior members of the team, the kind of questions they're asking, the kind of things that they're trying to understand about it in order to estimate, which then means that everyone is on the same page. So not only does everyone understand what they should be doing, which means the learning and the velocity of the team increases over time massively, but you also then have the other benefit that at the next sprint where something else might need to be done, everyone already has that understanding of what was developed early on and what the considerations were. So in short, absolutely, everyone, and there are lots of benefits to it being everyone.
Yeah, I just want to add to that, if you don't mind. It also plays with continuous improvement so that there's no silos within the delivery team.
Thank you. Moving on to the next question. How do you manage the conflict between the requirements to fix costs of delivery and the requirement to work agile and accommodate changing needs? Who would like to have this one? Quite a complicated one. Shall I read it out again?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Repeat that one.
How do you manage the conflicts between the requirement to fix costs of delivery and the requirement to work agile and accommodate changing needs?
Can I have the first crack?
Go ahead, George.
I think it's a great question, and I think as this is what we kind of do, right? We have customers all the time that want us to develop software for them, and everyone is far more comfortable with the concept of saying, I need to know how much it's going to cost, and that cost can't change, and then holding us accountable to that cost. So that kind of, we've had that sort of loop or that conversation, I can't remember how many times. So I can totally understand. And the thing is this, right? I think it boils down to the old way, and I say the old way because really it is absolutely the old way. It just doesn't work. And I think for us, we spend a lot of time with our customers explaining that why it doesn't work. Because quite frankly, if you are going to have if you're going to give someone a stick to beat you with with it, if you get things wrong, you're going to spend so much effort trying to make sure that you're part of the your part of deliveries as it should be. You're doing exactly what you said you want to do because you want to be accountable for those things. So it stops being a collaboration. It stops being a team effort. Business gets less value out of it. And the worst of all is it slows down. The amount of time you end up spending doing administration and the amount of time you kind of end up doing things like being sort of mindful of what was originally agreed versus what should be. And the landscape changes. Like on some of the bigger projects, we've worked on projects that have run that have been over multiple years, and things change. Teams will come and go, stakeholders will come and go, and there will be a requirement to change. So I think there needs to be a lot of communication. There needs to be a lot of trust. There needs to be a lot of transparency in terms of what's being done, what's required to do it, the challenges, and handling them as a team. And I think this circles back a little bit early on with Andy made the point, and I think I did too as well, was there needs to be involvement, like proper involvement and understanding from stakeholders. It's not just go off and do this thing, because it's going to be less, hands are going to be slightly tied in terms of how successful one can be and the speed to what someone can achieve. Anyway, that's my first crack at answering. And you might have something to add to it, but it's a very good question.
Yeah, no, it's a great answer, George. I mean, what I'd add to that was the point about running agile doesn't mean that you're only developing in 2-week time boxes and that's it. The beginning of a true agile project starts off with, who are my users? What problems am I trying to solve from them? What is the business value that this solution is actually going to deliver? And ultimately, what do we want to get to as our endpoint for this product? And everything that you do on an agile project is anchored around that particular thought and that particular vision. The difference with the way that agile works as compared to kind of a fixed project is that what you're doing over those 2-week increments is you're constantly reviewing what is most valuable. What are we going to deliver first? What is going to get our users happy quickly? Because the other point about agile is that unlike waterfall, where you wait 6 months before the users even get hands on something, with an agile project, you're potentially doing deployments every week or every 2 weeks. You're getting your things in the hands of the users, and ultimately your real measure of value is the feedback that you get from your users about it. So ultimately, you're not going to be doing this just in 2-week increments and the product evolves as it happens. You always have that end point that you want to go to, but the journey that you take to get there is slightly more flexible. So, and again, to George's point, making sure that your stakeholders are engaged all the way along the line and are keeping that vision on track, that is super important to make sure everybody's happy. Does that add some extra to this?
I think as well, what Andy just said, which kind of emphasizes that all of us have said that one of the warning signs is not getting the valuable stuff out first. Now, you see everyone's using the same kind of terms of collaboration, showing why am I not seeing valuable stuff? Immediately there's a disconnect there, which if the emphasis and the massive value is actually delivering what's important from get-go all the time, then there's a disconnection about what's important. Hence why all of us have said it's probably the biggest warning sign.
Thank you. Our next question is to Lisa. So someone's asking, Lisa gave an example where they delivered in 8 months. How long did the initial process take to turn it around, days or weeks?
Certainly not days. I would like to have said days, but it was weeks, unfortunately. and it was a 6-week period that it took us to dig in to see. And that was 2 of us just trying to understand where we are, you know, where they were, what they were doing, and how far into the project. Well, after 3 years, you're pretty far down the line, but more to see what would fit the business to get them to the end goal. So again, it depends on the project. The quicker you identify those issues, the better for your project, because 3 years down the line, there's a lot of stuff to sift through. So it was a lot of sleepless nights and a lot of paperwork and sort of interviews and digging around in the system, you know, to see what's what. So certainly not an easy task, but it is doable, and projects are always rescuable.
Thank you. Our next question is, how do you make a decision to expand your team for Project Rescue? What skills and competencies do you care about most? Who would like to have this one? So what skills are the most valuable in Project Rescue? It seems like this person might be looking at performing Project Rescue internally.
I mean,
Okay, so go for it, George, that's fine.
I wasn't gonna, I don't think I had a full answer for this, to be honest with you, but my initial thought that I thought I would share would be, you know, when we circle back to what Andy was talking about with delivery science and what are the indicators to show that the project is on track, off track, how well we're doing. It's not, it is, you can create, obviously we have created an overall score, so it's not, but there are certain parts, and every project has to be evaluated on its own merits. And one of the key things is team structure, team skills. So for example, just to dig into that, you know, if, you know, we often find if if there's a hole in the team, maybe a skills or a competency, let's say around DevOps and continuous deployment and integration, you find that the velocity is impacted. Now, if we were coming in and looking at something like that and we saw there was a hole there and actually the normal side effect of velocity was being impacted, then you would say immediately, yes, well, you've got a hole there, it needs to be filled. Let's get someone in. So I think depending on where the problem is, you know, that could obviously indicate a requirement of either a restructuring of the team or missing skills that need to be added, would be my initial response.
Yeah, I mean, I think to echo your point, George, as well, though, it's not always a question of adding more people, right? There is, I mean, certainly part of the McKinsey report talks about this idea of bringing 20 more people in isn't necessarily going to make you 20 times more productive. There is a point at which actually it becomes less productive. And arguably, if you look at the principles of Agile, it really favors smaller teams, right? So this is smaller people working on a focused set of work. So it's not necessarily always about bringing in more people and skills. In some respects, it might just be a question of reorientating the way they collaborate together to be more effective in what they do, making sure they're following the right behaviors and also kind of measuring the right things to see if the changes that are being made are actually having the impacts that you want.
Yeah, Andy, actually, I was going to say that it's more important that somebody knows where to look and what to look for, so that you identify what's wrong in your project, and then you follow there's a few categories we look at, which easily tell us if there's an issue, and that could lead to skills issues down the line, but it may not necessarily just be skills. You actually need to evaluate what's wrong first. So you need someone accountable and somebody senior enough to be able to evaluate what's wrong.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that I'd add to this as well is it's not just about the technical team. You know, to the points we've been making all the way through this, it might be that actually there's a gap in the engagement from the stakeholders and their involvement in the project, and that's not giving the team the guidance that they need to be doing the right thing. So it's not always something that's a challenge in the technical areas. It could be much broader than that, and that's kind of why the framework that we have is designed to take into consideration these things, not just focusing on the actual core team who are doing the physical development work.
Yeah, and that's a valid business challenge as well, right? I mean, you know, sometimes I've seen in the past where you'll have a very competent product owner or project manager, but maybe they come across a little bit junior, and then, you know, one of the stakeholders who may be relatively senior will kind of almost ignore them for personality or gravitas reasons as opposed to competency reasons. But that could derail the project, and that's not necessarily a skills thing, but it has to be addressed as well.
Sure. Okay, I think we can move on to the next question. Can you please repeat and expand on what should be included in a project dashboard? Who would like to have this one? Sounds
I
like
can hear someone's licking their pen and getting ready to make some notes.
yeah,
on this.
exactly. Sounds like a question for either you, Andy, or Lisa.
So, I mean, typically speaking, these are the standard things that you would measure around projects. So this is things like the velocity. So these are the number of points that are being delivered each sprint by the team, or potentially the number of stories that are being delivered by the team. This is things like the number of changes that are happening during the course of a sprint, right? So if you start out with a goal and you have a sprint goal with a number of stories in there, and suddenly something happens outside of the project and 5 new stories have to come in to react to a bug or something that's happened, and then therefore 5 of the stories have to get kicked out that were the priorities, and then 3 months down the line this is repeatedly happening. Actually, you can see that in your stats that the number of changes is way too high, and therefore you have to do something about how you're reacting to the changes. So again, number of changes is another one, number of stages, or rather the time at which a particular item has been sat at a particular stage in the life cycle. So things like this. I don't want to be giving away all of our secret sauce, but certainly these are the sort of things that you want to be thinking about over and above just looking at whether the team's producing a certain number of points.
I mean, I don't think I'm not worried about the secret sauce as much. And I would just say that the way we do it for ourselves is we have 18 categories that we think are important. Within each of those 18 categories are one or more items that we would use in terms of, if you were going to look in medical terms, it's like, you know, it's kind of like CPR. There's a primary survey, I think that they call it, where they kind of look at a casualty and say, right, is there a pulse? Is there this? Is there that? Let's identify the area of trauma or casualty, and then we know what to do. So we've split that out into 18 different things. It's for certain companies and certain projects, some of those are more weighted than others. So there's a lot of your own DNA that goes into this in terms of the project, the business, what's going on. And some of those things are going to be more important. But certainly, you know, if we're going to look at the high level things there, Andy, and I guess I'm kind of directing this at you, if we're going to look at the high level things, you know, we talk about sort of understanding the product, you know, kind of how good are we at that? Is the team right? Are we actually developing what is required? Are we developing, you know, those are kind of the high level things of, you know, is the speed right? Is the structure right? Are the team right? Are we delivering what actually needs to be consumed? Are we holding ourselves accountable? Is there other time frames? Now, I'm giving those in plain English. Obviously, we'll call them, you know, different things, and we measure them, you know, in different ways. So like, are we delivering fast enough would be, you know, velocity would be one of those pulses, right? Which is the easiest and the most agile sort of kind of thing, it's velocity. But there are other things that we look at for that as well. So I guess circling back to the main question, that's a big question. That's like, I mean, that's a huge question. And I think it goes into, it's a combination of what are industry standards and best practices, what's right for your project, and what are the expertise. So we use our expertise to translate that, but someone might translate that and weight things slightly differently. Good questions when it gets a lot of input. I like.
Does anyone have anything to add to that?
Well, I would just say one of the biggest measurements are whether you're reaching your sprint goals and whether you're delivering that value. It's not a matter of ticking boxes, because you can get, and we mentioned this earlier, you can get delivery happening, velocity looking great, but stuff coming out doesn't mean anything. So it's always got to be realigned to your stakeholders who are participating in your process.
Yeah, there's a great term that I've heard called feeding the beast. So this is, you know, kind of throughput of stories, high velocity on the team. Hey, we're smashing all of the things that we set up, but ultimately, if it isn't in service of the business value and what it is that you're trying to solve, then you're feeding the beast. So making sure for that isn't happening is critical.
Yeah.
Sure. Moving on. So the person who was asking about skills, just wanted to specify on something. What skills do you think you have gained during project rescue or project management activities? And which skills would you recommend to New Era's project employees? So what skills do you think you have gained during project rescue? Let's start with that, maybe. Who would like to have this one?
So what skills have we gained by designing Project Rescue? Is that the question?
I'm not entirely sure if they mean that or if they mean just your general experience.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the one thing that I'd call out here, and it's something that George has touched on as well. Project Rescue isn't a silver bullet, right? It's a framework and a methodology that is going to be fitted to each individual client. It's going to be designed based on the landscape, the complexity of the project, the number of people involved in it, the duration that it's been running for. So actually, the one thing that we've gained or the most important thing that we've gained is going through this is seeing the variety of different ways it can be applied out there, and actually making sure that it's kind of designed in a way that will help out people's projects, regardless of how large or small it is, how complex it is as well. So it's, I guess, flexibility and adaptability is probably one of the key things that we've learned in putting this Project Rescue together, because every client is different, every use case is different, and every solution that it recommends for them is different as well.
Sure. Okay, I think one final question. They're slowing down now. Let me just find this again. I can see value in the delivery framework, but we're a small company. How would this work for us? What adjustments would we need to make? This sounds like an Andy question as well.
I've been talking way too much.
Keep going.
So what I'd say is that we've designed it deliberately to be flexible and cover both small and large companies. As George talked about earlier, the thing about fixing challenges with projects is that it happens in the people, right? It's people who have to change their behaviors, who have to change the ways they work, the processes they follow, the tools that they use. And in a small company, there's going to be less people involved. The likelihood is it will be less people covering more roles, double dipping. And so in that respect, the benefit of Project Rescue there is that potentially, because there are less people that have to be reorientated, and therefore it's easier to gain their buy-in, we could actually potentially, through one pass of this framework, solve many more of their problems, because actually it's the same people who are having different parts of their job changed. Obviously, in a larger company, it still applies as well. It still means that we can go ahead and do this, but because you've then got maybe multiple teams involved and independent leadership of those teams that are involved, there is a degree of kind of reorientation and convincing that needs to be done with those people before we can help them push ahead with making those changes. And so for a larger company, they'll still get benefits, they'll still see improvements, but what we'll do is we'll focus on the things that will be the most value for them first. So the framework and its underlying sense fits both small and large companies alike. It just means that in a smaller company, there is the potential for you to get more things done because there are less people that need to be reorientated to the way they work.
Thank you. I don't see any more questions coming through. It's your very final chance now. We've had quite a few good ones though, so that's good. So I'd like to thank the panel and the viewers for attending. It's been a very interesting session. Obviously had some very interesting questions, so people are very engaged. I'm going to send everyone a little summary of some of the main points as an email later on today. Obviously we want this workshop to be as practical as possible. And I'd like to wish everyone a nice rest of the afternoon, and bye for now. See you next time.